Okay, well, hey there, Linda. Thank you so much for joining me today for the Confident Sober Women podcast. I am so excited that you're here and on a topic that is so important, but yet also sometimes so difficult to talk about for so many of us. So I'm really glad that we're having this conversation. And I know a lot of people are going to get just so much out of it. So I'm going to turn the mic over to you and let you share a little bit more about your story, and then we're going to chat.
For sure. Thanks, Shelby. It's so great to be here. And thanks for the opportunity to talk about money. Because I think, again, like you said, it's one of those things that people are uncomfortable about talking about. Just kind of like, I think when I first got sober, I'm going to be celebrating 11 years in March. And at first, it was really hard for me to talk about my recovery overall. And then now that, I really try to give it the voice, like money, like the voice I give to my recovery overall, because people need to hear about it. People need to talk about it. So that's what I do. I'm a money coach who helps support women in recovery. I focus on financial sobriety. So what that means is just getting financially sober, financial recovery, whatever term you want to use for that. My story, a little bit about my background and how I came to be a financial coach is that I actually worked as a financial advisor for about 20 years. And in that time, I would say it was 17 years into my career, I got sober. And even before that, kind of backing up to childhood, like money was always a really hard topic. Money was always a really hard thing. And it was one of those things that the energy of it was really uncomfortable all the time. I grew up in a home with two alcoholic parents who got sober when I was growing up, thank goodness. And what a gift to me. But as I was in my career as a financial advisor, I was investing millions of dollars for people, and I was addictively spending money. I was addictively spending money all the time. I was telling people what they should do with their money, and I was just a financial disaster. And it was when I had gotten sober and the job itself was sucking the life out of me. But I was actually once I got sober from alcohol, I did an addiction transference, which is sometimes really a regular thing that happens with us in recovery, is we look for something else to numb out on. You know, the drink or drugs or drinking aren't there anymore. So I started to completely black out on spending money. I remember one specific shopping trip that I don't remember anything about it. All I remember is coming home and my husband was like, wow, like that's a lot of shopping bags. I didn't even remember being in there. I'd spent over $800. And this was something that I regularly was taking part in. So from there, I financed our home to used it as my wallet. I committed what I like to call like financial infidelity. I was doing things financially that I was kind of tricking and coercing my husband into, and he didn't have the knowledge of what was really going on. He trusted me. I was a banker. I was a financial advisor. Just sign here. And, almost losing our home, our cars, everything. And I was on a She Recovers retreat and, put that on a credit card and was on a She Recovers retreat. And Dawn and I were sitting there and she said, oh, we're doing She Recovers coaches. Like, you should be a financial coach for us. And I was like, yeah, that's a complete joke. Like, I'm a financial disaster. And she said to me, sometimes you need to teach what you need to learn. And I was like, and that hit me. And I still get goosebumps when I tell this story because it changed my life. And it was like, wow. So I took money coach training. My first designation was strictly on money behaviors. It didn't even get into the numbers and stuff, which is something that I've learned is a huge tool because of like we can make budgets and we can look at numbers and we can add them up and everything's good. But if we're buying things to try to make us feel better all the time because we're super unhappy, like budgets aren't going to do anything. Like, why are we reaching outside of ourselves to feel better? So the behaviors piece is something I really focus on. And then, of course, pairing that with my financial advisor hat and being able to build what I call like spending plans. Most people come to me and budgets feel too restrictive, like tried budgets, they don't work. So yeah, we go on to building a spending plan, looking at behaviors, really understanding why we're doing what we're doing with money, which can be scary. So that's a big piece of, my story. I had over, and this is always a number that I feel all the things in my body. My husband and I were over $130,000 in credit card debt. And as of September 2023, we had paid them off. So it was, I've been working on this for a very long time. And what I think is really powerful about my story is that I've done it. And like from being someone who was blackout shopping, spending money to, having to pay off that debt, feels really, really good. And I know that brings hope to some people because it feels impossible. And if I can do it and help spread the word of like how to do it, it makes it a lot more accessible and hopeful for people.
It sure does. This is exactly how it works, right? This is what we're taught that like
Totally.
when we get well, we're able to spread the message of hope, exactly like you said. And
Yeah,
sometimes we are in the amidst people in our family or our friends or whoever who just aren't ready to receive what we have, and that's totally fine too. But we
yeah,
just never know when it's going to be useful, right? Like, you were talking to somebody in your friend group or whatever, and then suddenly 2 years from now, that friend has like another friend who she was talking to, and then all of a sudden now she's connecting her to you, and we just don't know.
for
And
sure.
that's why I think that although anonymity is such a nice part of like a lot of the 12-step programs and such, and I believe in that. I got sober in AA, and I think that it's very valuable for a lot of reasons. There
Yeah,
is a piece of us that I do believe is meant to share um in a way that we feel comfortable with. Like, not everybody wants to share all the gory details of their stories publicly, and that's completely fine. But you can share some
totally.
things like, I know what it feels like to be so desperate that I felt like I had no way out. Or I know what it feels like to just be so embarrassed that I had to go crawl to my husband and tell him these things. Like, we don't have
For
to
sure.
share every single detail for it to still be really impactful. I always like to say that. So
Yeah, I love that.
thank you so much for sharing so vulnerably too. Speaking of that, I do think that it is how it works. People do relate to this. I think in many, many ways. We live in a land. If you live in America, I was born in America. I've never lived anywhere else. If you live here, it's really the land of the plenty. I think
Right.
even if you're lower income or considered poor in our country, that's significantly better off than many, many places in this world. And that's not something I have firsthand experience with, but I've talked to other friends of mine who've come from other countries, and they've told me things like that, and it
Right.
does make me realize, like our poor here are just not the same as some other like poor people in the world. So
Right.
we live in the land of the plenty, there's abundance everywhere, there's food everywhere, there's products, there's dollar stores, there's tchotchkes, there's just stuff everywhere, no matter where you turn, and every single Walmart and every single gas station, there's just so much. Sometimes I go in those gas stations and I'm always like, I'm not a big like stuff person. Like, I don't like to have a lot of stuff around and things. So
Yep.
sometimes I don't, that's not my thing, right? Um, but I'll see these things like on the counters and stuff. I'm like, who's buying this? Like, who's
Yeah.
buying that stuff? But like, people are,
For
right?
sure. Yep, most definitely. And yeah, I bet a lot of the people I work with probably are buying some of that stuff. I don't know what it's like. I've heard I'm in Canada, so gas stations are probably a little bit different here. But yeah, it's that stuff thing that you were talking about, right? And when is it enough? When can we just finally like be who we are, where we are, and live with what we have? And I think that, life is kind of teaching us that right now in this moment of time of getting back to being like simple because the cost of food and everything is really something that in my world people are really struggling with. And the economies and everything. And so it's one of those things that Yeah, it's a lot right now. And so really kind of keeping it top of mind and controlling what we can right now. So yeah, it's one of those things in my world where there's just stuff everywhere and then it's like and the cost of living and we're just completely living in debt trying to just get by in life and it can feel impossible.
It certainly can. And it is
Yeah.
such an emotional experience. You know,
Oh,
this stuff that
yes.
we're talking about is, I mean, we are kind of simplifying things at times by saying, stuff or things out of register or whatever, but it's an emotional experience. There is a dopamine
Hmm.
quality to this experience that's exactly the same as our substance use addiction, right? So like
Absolutely.
it's the same thing that we get, I have I spending wasn't really my thing really necessarily, but had once I got sober, I've been sober for kind of a long time and I was whatever. Other things can certainly fill in for me that void or that addiction, right? That's
Yes.
not substances. So I'm not going to die from it, at least not right away, but it
Right.
certainly does have the same qualities. Things like food,
Hmm.
plenty or not enough, I mean, both
Yeah.
of those are part of my story. And so I can definitely relate to that hit, and just to be kind of silly, like I was raised as an athlete, and so we always were very, very healthy. I was a marathon runner for 10 years. And so it was I was extremely rigid and regimented with my food. I was weighing, measuring all the stuff for many
Hmm.
years. And that's fine. That worked, whatever, for a period of time. Then when COVID hit, I was raising three teenagers in our home that was extremely traumatic. We were in like a sustained trauma for 4 years, basically, that was horrific. And
Hmm.
around that time, I started to develop like emotional eating. And
Okay.
like I didn't ever have that problem before. So it's very similar to the spending, right? But
For
like
sure.
for me, like in our home, everything is super like not exactly perfect, but it's pretty clean. Like there's nothing really here. There's just very clean foods and like we eat the same foods every day, and that's fine. But then I would get like in my car, and like as soon as I got in my car, it was like
Totally.
this thing happened. I actually had to like
Mhm.
do some EMDR work on this. Like I
Okay.
would get in the car and be like, where can I get?
Hmm.
Like
Hmm.
where can I get? Like, ooh, like what? Like it was like this seeking behavior,
Yes.
like drug. It was terrible. And I occasionally that will still happen because it's like that when I leave my home, it's that
Hmm.
uncontrolled environment, and it is a dopamine hit. It's
Absolutely.
very scary. So it's the same thing for people with the spending, and you're standing in that register and there's 17 things, it's only $1 or it's two things for $1 or whatever. And
Hmm.
suddenly that stuff adds up. And so sometimes it's a blessing that we live in a place that has, I don't know about Canada. I feel like it's probably similar, that we have everything we need, that we have
Absolutely.
access to
Yes.
everything we need, but then it can be a curse too.
Hmm. Yeah, it most definitely can. And it's in the society we're living in, especially those of us who struggle with spending and want to there's the social pressures of it, like having certain name brands, looking a certain way, and especially when you're in recovery, there starts to become that feeling as well of feeling other, and then so you're wanting to fit in with other people, and I see that a lot of just like, especially like that name brand stuff and looking a certain way and doing certain things. And when I first got sober and the spending was going bananas for me, it was like, of course I'm going to go to the spa. Of course I'm going to go for a weekend away. I'm sober. I'm not drinking anymore. And and that lasted until it didn't, right? It was just kind of like I created such a mess, but I gave myself that permission. And I think there's a balance that needs to happen because, yes, I think that when we're in recovery, there needs to be some things that we do partake in, that we treat ourselves with, and that kind of thing. But at the same time, there needs to be that balance with it and not going too over the top. And that's where it can feel a little bit hard. And that's where, like, what I call sober spending is really important. Like making intentional decisions with your spending, planning your spending is so important. I think that out of anything, planning your spending, really being in conscious like contact with it. Where am I in my spending plan? I think of it as like your spending plans, like your map of like what you want to do with your money. It could be a daily map, it could be a monthly map, whatever you want to look at. Um, because again that the restriction can kind of come in just like food, right? Like if you're heavily restricting spending, you're going to go on a spending spree. And then so kind of building a spending plan, planning your spending, and then yeah, checking in, where am I on the map, what's going on, oh, I spent that, what was that about, how was I feeling in that moment, what was going on, and really just kind of checking in with your money. But sometimes we need to do that emotional work first to get to the point where we can even look at our money. Because it's like, ooh, I'm not opening that app. I'm not doing that. Like, why am I doing that? That feels really scary. It's okay. Why is it scary? Let's work on that first.
Well, I
Yeah,
think that one of the things is we can only do so many things at one time.
totally.
We can only ask
Yes,
ourselves, so we can't like try to go on a health journey and also get sober and then also, decide we're going to run a marathon and then also say we're going to reduce our debt. Like we kind of have to like back it down and be like, okay, for this stage
yeah,
right now,
yeah.
I'm focused on my money and my
Yes,
goal is debt reduction or whatever it is, or save for college, whatever your goal is, and then
totally.
maybe in the net, a little bit of time goes by, you get used to it, and then you're like, okay, now I'm going to tackle my health. And so now I'm going to
Right.
focus on nutrition or whatever, or movement. But yeah, when we start piling on all these things, it's really not sustainable. And that's
For
what people
sure.
end up like failing, or they have, like, they can't, it's not sustainable. And then they get down on themselves and it kind of restarts that whole cycle.
Most definitely. Yeah, the shame spiral just hits again. And that's where a lot of the times I actually don't recommend that people do a lot of like deep money work really until they're sober for a little while, because I think when it comes down to it, making sure that your sobriety is number one.
Hold on one second.
Yeah, for sure.
Yes. Can you go away? Thanks. You just knocked this over.
Oh no.
Just knocked my head. Sam, get down. Let you guys come down here. Just lay down like a normal dog. Okay? Like a normal dog on the road right here. Lay down. Just like scratching at my rug and then scratching, 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 and then until it like knocks my finger. Oh my God.
Of
Yeah,
course.
lay down. Okay. Lay down. I see you. Hi. Okay, we'll just regroup.
Yes.
Sorry.
Oh, good.
Yeah, I think that it's really important to just assess the first things first, right? That's a good principle that we learned, or at least I did. When I got sober in like the 12
Mhm.
steps. That's one of the phrases that we use in the program, because it means this, right? Let's take care of the first things that we need to take care of that are the most important things, and then we can start layering on. We can layer
For
on
sure.
like even emotionally too, like let's just take care of getting sober. Like when you first get sober, or you're like, oh, I have a problem with substances, or somebody tells you do, or whatever, it's a lot of work just to try to get and stay sober for many, many months. And then you can be like, okay, now I can layer in like step work or therapy or whatever. We're not
Mhm.
gonna jump into all of it at once. Let's just stay sober one day at a time for
For
like a
sure.
while, and then we layer
Yes,
in other stuff. So it's the same thing with money, and
for sure.
I can totally see it, because it is overwhelming, and it's not really about the money, just like the substance. I mean, that's just kind of like the symptom, right? But
Exactly.
one of the things that I can't remember if you touched on this in your story, but one thing that I've seen, and maybe you've seen this or experienced it too, is I've seen some people like in my life, my personal life, and then in work too, who were raised in families where there just really wasn't any money. Like they just really were poor, right? Or they
Yes.
just
Yes.
lived in a land of just lack. And
Mhm.
so then they kind of get up and out, right? And maybe they become successful, they get educated, or they get great jobs and they start to become successful, so they're making money. And
Right.
they may not have any education around it. Maybe they don't know about savings or 401ks and all that stuff, because that wasn't the language that was being used. But this
Mhm.
emotional experience and this mindset around money, and I really want you to talk about this.
Yeah.
This mindset around money that I've seen and people is like, I'm never gonna have that experience ever again, nor
Mhm.
are my children. And so
Right.
then it like becomes like the opposite. Like then they go, well, we're going to get this car because we
Mhm.
never had that kind of car, and
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm going to give my kids all this money. One of my daughter's significant other, we had this and we had that, and it was like they were he was just constantly handing those kids money, because
Right.
well, I don't ever want them to feel like I did.
Yeah. I never want them to feel like there's
And I'm
never
like,
enough.
that's
Yeah.
actually not going to work out for you.
Heck no.
So it's that money, it's that mindset piece, like that you were,
Hmm.
whatever you were raised with. So how does somebody really kind of like tackle that? Because I feel like that actually needs to be first, right? Like,
Yeah,
what are your
agreed.
beliefs about money? What do you
Yeah.
believe money is? What do you
Yep.
believe it isn't? What does it mean to have a lot, not enough? What is it that you believe? How do you work with people on that?
Yeah, I think what I usually do is like we work on their what I call their money story.
Okay.
And I think that kind of thinking of what's really powerful is thinking of what's your first memory of money.
Mhm.
And what was the feeling of it? I've had so many people come to me with my parents always fought about money. Money was always stressful. Money was like, we never have enough. We can't afford that. We can't afford that. Like that constant message all of the time. Or the parents sitting at the kitchen table with the bills out, fighting over money. And that would be like so many people, that's their vision of what money is as a child, right? So, as we know in our recovery and therapy and all that stuff, like what happens in our childhood really can and does impact our adult life. And so when it comes to that, it's like, okay, like exactly that. What do I think about money? What do I believe about money? And then a really powerful question to ask yourself is, who's actually saying that? Like, whose voice is that? Is that even mine? Does this even belong to me?
Mhm.
And most of the time, I'd say 90% of the time, it doesn't belong to you. It's something that you have inherited in conversations. And then I love getting to like the sciencey, like when it comes to like trauma and how it's passed down in families and all of that. Like the DNA, just like how it gets passed down from person to person. And like there's trauma in there too, right? So then we have grandparents or great grandparents that lived through the depression, and maybe your parents were kids of like living in the depression, or just different things that happen historically that then get passed on to your parents. Like nobody talks about money. It's this thing that like everybody was thrown into. I would say hardly anybody has been in a home where like they talk about money a lot. And then so yeah, that financial literacy, there becomes shame. Like, why don't I know this? Why don't I know about money? Why don't I know about a 401k? Why don't I know about savings? I was never taught that. Then it's like so much embarrassment and shame to even talk like that, right? Where that's where I want to like get rid of that stigma of talking about it. Because if you bring it up to your friend, how great would it be for them to say, like, yeah, I have no idea what people are talking about when they're talking about it either. Like, what are we doing?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love the idea of doing that money story as kind of like an initial activity
Yes.
when you're working with somebody, or
Yeah.
any of us can do this, right? Is just to be able to really kind of identify. And I have done a little bit of work on this because although the spending wasn't really a total issue for me, some of the money mindset stuff was. And
Yeah.
I was actually I was raised in a family, like we were, my family was a business owner. It was fine. They were like we were fine. We had everything we needed and most things we wanted. And my husband happens to be an accountant, and he doesn't work in an
Nice.
accounting firm, but he's like extremely financially literate, and that's actually
Yes.
something that gets talked about. That's pretty much all anybody talks about around here. So,
I love it.
actually not great. It's not great either.
Right.
I was always, because I guess maybe the way we were raised, it wasn't necessarily a bad thing, but something in me made it bad. Maybe like maybe it was my own addiction side, or just not really being emotionally mature, I guess.
Right.
And then also my husband's style, and it's not like he's bad. It's just that he's just very, wanting to just, he just wants to say, he just wants us to be okay later. And I love that about him. But I
Right.
was constantly that girl, which is like, we can't afford that. That's too expensive. Like not
Mhm.
necessarily always outwardly, but sometimes always in, oh, I can't do that. Yeah, no.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
I finally identified that, or somebody, I came across somebody like you probably, who started to talk about the language we use. And I was like,
Mhm.
okay, I didn't necessarily need to take any necessarily real action financially, although it's never a bad thing to do that. I
For
needed to
sure.
change my language. So
Yeah. Yeah.
I started to really notice like when I was using words like that, like expensive or we can't afford that. And I started to challenge myself on that. And I would say things like, that's actually just not true. Like we can afford that, but we
Hmm.
use all of our resources for something else. You
Right.
know,
Yeah, I love
like
that.
we used our resources to for my kids went to private school. So like our kid, we pay a lot of tuition. So sure, we could afford to go on 2 gigantic vacations a year probably, but we chose to do something else with that money.
Hmm.
And so when I started doing that a little bit more, and I started doing that with my kids a little, who are all young adults now, like
Yeah.
I remember one time we were out to dinner and somebody called me and said, like, can you stop and pick us up something? And I was like, oh no, there's stuff at home or whatever. And they're like, well, you guys are out, like she was just being whatever. And I
Yeah.
said, and she said, don't, what do you mean we don't have any money or whatever? I said, I said, we used our resources for other things.
Yeah.
And
Nice.
I'm
I love
like,
that.
yeah, so I'm trying, it's for me, but it's probably benefiting to other people because I catch myself in that a lot. And it's
For
not
sure.
true. It's not a true
Yes.
statement, and we all have choices. So we all
Hmm.
get to decide what we spend our money on too. And also, this is a values question. I mean, this is a deeper part of the story, but this is a values question. To us, that
Right.
education is extremely valuable. So we spend a tremendous amount of money on education.
Right.
Some people might not have that, but they would rather have adventure or travel
Yes.
or like a
Yes.
nicer home or a pool. And like, so great. So you get to do that, right? Um,
Right.
we all have choices. My oldest
For
one, I
sure.
remember saying one time when she's young, she's like, I'm just the kind of girl that always needs to have my nails done. I just know I need to have my I said, that's fine. I said,
Hmm.
that's cool to know that. I said, you know that about yourself. I said, you're just gonna need to make sure you always have that as a line item in your plan. Like
Great.
then
Love
you
that.
won't probably go to Starbucks 3 times a month because you'll need that money for nails. So
Yes.
we just have to make a choice. Like you can have that, but then you can't we can't do all of the things.
Yes, most definitely. And it's again, there's such that balance, right? And having that awareness and really thinking about it because we live in this plastic world right now where we're just tapping stuff, right? We're just tapping stuff, most of us. I don't use credit cards very often because it's still a slippery slope for me because it can so easily add up. And it all of a sudden is like, how is there like 2,500 on my credit card? Like we were using it for gas to get quote unquote points. Like this system is not working. It's like, so I don't use them a lot, but we're just tapping and we're not actually like seeing how much is going through our bank accounts and that sort of thing. So, and then all of a sudden it's like, I don't have money to pay those bills. Like, and a lot of people these days are spending money even before they get it. So it's,
Right.
yeah, yeah.
So first you do the story, which I love. Then we can tackle
Yes.
some money mindset work. And then you mention like the budget pros and cons, I guess. Like there's
Yes,
pros and cons to both, right? It sounds like it is nice, I think, to have an understanding about like every single one of your line items, right? So you
for
have,
sure.
rent, you have car, you have groceries, daycare, whatever, all the bills that you have to pay.
Yes,
That is your budget. And so it's helpful to have that like deep understanding because like you said, I mean, I don't think a lot of people have a lot of, and again, I don't really think it's our fault because at least here in our country, they don't, this is not a school thing, and it's a shame. It should be a financial literacy class in all the schools,
for
but it's
sure. I
not.
agree.
It is not. Why is that not
Yeah,
a part of school?
I know.
Um, so they should know, like, and then silly things, they're not silly, but things like insurance, like, we have life insurance and home, all the things that, like, you
Yeah.
forget about some of those like other bills, but they
Hmm.
are a part of your life. And so then it's like easy to not have sight into that if you don't see them all on your paper.
Most
So, but
definitely.
then you said like sometimes that creates feelings of restriction. So you usually like
Mhm.
to have a spending plan. Can you say a little bit more like how do you work with somebody on like at the very beginning stages? Like what are your first steps that somebody could literally kind of take away, maybe consider doing now?
Yeah, I think that when it comes to it, like what I think of a spending plan is what you're choosing to spend your money on. And we have fixed expenses in life where we actually don't have a choice, right? Like things like rent or mortgage or whatever, right? But then it really comes down to, how am I spending money? What does this look like? Because a lot of people will be like, I have no idea where my money goes. And that's the one thing I hear all the time. And so really kind of when I think of spending plan, it just feels like it creates more of a choice than like budget, right? The word budget is just so triggering for people.
Okay.
So it's kind of like a spending plan is planning your money, planning your spending and just putting a little bit of a twist on it so like it doesn't feel that restriction. But even then, like really kind of like, what are my fixed expenses? How much do I make every month? How much do I have left over? Oh,
Mhm.
no wonder I don't have any money. I'm spending like 1,500 on DoorDash or whatever. And so, and that's actually what I call it, like fixed expenses and then variable expenses. So gas, groceries, eating out, that kind of thing that you have to like intentionally plan it or else it can get out of control really quickly. So it's one of those things I know in the States, one of the apps that I recommend to use. It's so different between Canada and the US now for apps that people like for budgeting. In the States, you guys have so many. But the one I recommend is called Rocket Money. And so it is a very easy way to like, if you want to put your accounts in there, build a spending plan, aka budget in there,
Mhm.
and it can like help you track your spending. It does it automatically. But checking in with that consciously every day and having just like, I call it a money date, at least once a week, kind of like, okay, where am I? How are things going? How have my emotions tied into my spending this week? What felt good? What didn't? Really checking in with that stuff, I think is really important because planning is so important. That's why I call it a spending plan.
I agree with that. Planning is so important and it doesn't need
Yeah,
to be fixed. This isn't written in stone. It can be fluid.
totally.
But
Yes.
it's like a plan. And then we become flexible.
Yep.
Somebody gets ill or you have a big house repair. I mean, things come up. We get this, but you have at least an outline, right?
Exactly.
You have an outline. And so then, some months might be great. You're like, oh, wow, we actually like saved a bunch of money on like groceries because we were invited to things, or
Yeah.
we just ended up getting a bunch of coupons or whatever we did,
Yep.
so, okay, I love that. It's kind of like when I talk about exercise because that's a big part of my program as well, and just like mental health in
Nice.
general. But
Yeah.
exercise is not a word. I always use the word movement,
Yeah, I
because
love that.
exercise can be very triggering for people, and especially a
Totally.
lot of women just don't like to do that. And so they hear that and they're like, forget that. Or they
Totally.
automatically assume it's a gym, but like movement,
Right.
can be really anything you want it to be. You could be running around in your
Absolutely.
yard with your dog or riding
Yeah.
the bike in your neighborhood. It's just moving your body. So it's the
Yes.
same concept, like switching the
Absolutely.
language to make it a little bit more sustainable and accessible and feel
Yes.
better. You mentioned the feelings around it.
Mhm.
I understand feelings. I get it. I'm just curious how, like maybe what you see or how you help people to like notice that. Do you like give them instructions around like when you're doing the plan, notice how you're feeling or where you feel in your body, or like when you're out and about, notice, is that how you work with them?
For sure. And there's definitely some like I'm a big fan of like the word pause,
Mm,
like practicing the pause, like pausing. And like yeah, that's somatic work that we have to do overall in our lives and in recovery to try to be as present as possible because with money we can dissociate so easily. Like honestly, like I would say people most of the time dissociate when it comes to money conversations, making decisions with money. And sometimes it takes a while. So I'm a really big believer on like habit stacking of like what's working for you already right now on your recovery. Let's kind
mhm.
of build on that. So it would be for a lot of people in recovery, we have like morning routines. So that would be like prayer, meditation, different things like that, journaling. And then it's like, okay, like let's get really like into our bodies, feel how it's feeling, and then maybe part of our morning routine, we can have a little money date with ourselves and sit at our meditation table and open up our app and see, like, oh, how did spending go yesterday? What do I plan to spend today?
Yeah.
And then, like, really kind of, you're already in that relaxed zone of things you already know how to do and make you feel good, and starting to tie those in because we have so many unconscious messages that physically show up in our body with money that we're like, we stiffen up or again, we dissociate and we don't even know what's going on. Yeah.
You use that word associate, and that really grabbed me for sure. Like, why do
Yeah.
you think that is the case? Like, what is happening with that?
It's overwhelming. It's just too overwhelming. The shame just takes
Shame.
over. The shame, the spiral that starts to happen where you just can't even think straight. And it's just, and for me, like I grew up in a home where like there was a lot of yelling and fighting about money. So like when I used to think about doing money stuff, like I would be frozen in time. It would just bring back all of that baggage that isn't ours. And one of the things I love to say is like when people come to me, I envision them wearing like this really heavy backpack full of river rocks, right? And I can actually physically hear it. Like they're just exhausted, they're frustrated, they're shameful, they're embarrassed, they're angry, like all of the feelings. And as they start to tell me what's going on, I can hear like the rocks coming out of their backpacks, right? Like I can hear like literally that baggage start to, not have that power anymore. So yeah, money is heavy. It can feel really heavy.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I've seen it too, and I totally get it, what you're saying. And one thing that I've kind of learned and maybe heard through, social media or whatever these sources or people gurus I follow is probably around shifting our language and our mindset, but really a little bit deeper is an understanding of what actually money actually is.
Yeah.
And I admittedly was totally, this never came up for me. And I was like, oh, like that it's really, that we assign like a value to it. Value,
Mhm.
yes, dollars, but also just like a whole nother value. When
Mhm.
honestly, it's literally just a means to an end. Like it's just a commodity.
Right.
That's the right word. Like this is how people say it. Like
Yeah.
it's not a thing. It's just
Yeah.
like I need to buy potatoes and I have here's the $2 for the potatoes and you're gonna give me the potato.
Yeah.
There's nothing else about it.
Yeah.
And also I think this relates to jobs too. And I don't know how you work with this at all in your with about people around their careers or their jobs. Is like people I think tend to do this with their jobs too. Like they need sometimes certain kinds of jobs or status or whatever, or they have
Hmm.
to love their job or it has to be their passion. When really like a job is really what we just all we do to make money.
Yeah.
That's all it is. It's nothing else. It's
Yeah.
not who you are. It's not an identity. I mean, if you happen to like it also, then you win, like good
Hmm.
for you. But really,
Totally.
it's what we do to make money.
Yeah. Yeah. And a lot of people have the definition of what their money looks like is defining who they are as people.
It's an
And
identity.
so, yeah, exactly. So like my identity was like debt and I used to spend money like it was mine. It was like, "Oh, I have $50,000 available on a home equity line of credit. Great, let's go spend that." And then that was my identity for so long. And then it turned into like the shame and I'm lying. And it was the exact same feelings I had when I quit drinking.
Yeah.
It was like, oh my, here we are again.
Mhm.
Here we are again, but in a different light and in a different scenario. And it was rough. Rough
Yeah.
there for a while.
But
Yeah.
it's amazing. It is this one in particular, I think, is amazingly how just um the same they are, you know.
Yes,
I think
exactly.
food, I guess, too, but this one I feel like even more is just more that dopamine and the shame spiral.
Yeah.
And like because again, like if you were raised and I can see how that identity gets put on, right? Because they're like, oh, you were raised in this family where there wasn't anything, right? And then you
Mhm.
became a something, and now you're like, I have stuff. And so of course that in like that small, insecure, like childlike part of yourself is gonna
Exactly.
rear its ugly head often
Hmm. Hmm.
whenever you feel like you're less than or you
Yeah,
don't have enough or lack gets triggered. And so now you're suddenly the guy that's paying for everybody while we're out to dinner, or you're buying all
exactly.
the kids' snowballs on the team, and you're like, dude, you don't have to be so flashy. Like it's not that big of a deal. But
Yes,
but it's fulfilling that kind of that emotional need. Oh, it is
absolutely.
so big. This
Yeah,
topic
it's loaded.
it's loaded. I'm so glad that you are doing
Yeah.
the work that you're doing because I mean this is way more than we can obviously, really tackle too much of in a short time, but the work you're doing does, and that's it's so critical because and what you said before too, I think is really important. That I'm learning again a little bit more, I guess, in my older years. I don't know, is that people just don't know stuff.
No,
And it's not their
no,
fault, like it's whether it's
totally.
money or around nutrition or whatever. I remember people saying, you probably hear this a lot too, like when you're creating your courses and different things, like we have to remind ourselves that like we're an expert in our area,
Right.
so that when we're talking, like it's very easy as a clinician for me to be like, oh yeah, you know what validation means. Like everybody knows that. Like you see it on Instagram or whatever. And you're like, well, maybe
Right.
they probably don't. They don't understand. They've heard the word, but they might not know what that means. And
Hmm.
so to me, it's common sense, second nature. This is not even a thought. I know how to do that. Same for you. But
Yeah.
somebody else might be like, wow, yeah, I don't. And so we have to dumb ourselves down a lot to like be able to explain things to a
Yes.
person that literally doesn't know any of that. And
Yeah.
I think that that's a reminder that I have been really having a lot lately is just like a lot of people don't know things. And it's again, it's not because there's something wrong with them. It's just that they didn't come across their path or
Yeah.
it just no one was talking about it. And but the thing that's great about our country and yours, like you can know it. You know, like you have
Yes.
the internet. So like you
Yeah.
literally can decide like, oh, actually I want to become more financially literate. And whether you
Yeah.
call Linda or you find somebody or you just go to Google and you're like, what does that even mean? Like we can know we can literally know anything. We can
Yes.
literally know anything in this day and age. So
For sure.
unfortunately, the shame is very real and it
Hmm.
can keep us from doing that. It can keep us from going to know the thing. But what I
Yeah.
want everyone to know and hear and feel is like you can know anything you want.
Yeah.
Anything. You can sit in a public library and Google search your to your heart's content for 2 hours and learn anything you want in the whole world now.
For sure. Yeah.
That is a
Yeah.
brilliant thing.
Yes. And I think too, like I have a podcast, Financial Sobriety School, and I talk a lot about because sometimes you're not going to find people who are talking about like the emotional piece with
Yeah.
money. And I think that's where like there's two sides of it. Yes, there's that we can look it up and we can figure out like, oh, this is how I'm going to make a budget. But then there's also that part of us, like you talked about that inner child kind of thing, right? Like, how do we get in touch with that of like what we really need? And I think like, and I have so many episodes that really get into, there's so much free stuff out there
Yeah.
to be able to get into like what's really going on. And we're so lucky in this day and age that we have things like you with your podcast and just like doing the work that we're doing. The world needs more of it, that's for sure.
I think so too. And I'm thrilled to be in this time period because of
Yeah,
that.
me
And
too.
so sometimes I think and the emotional piece is not nothing, no issue is immune from that. So
Hmm.
that's always a part of every issue, whether it's food. So like when we start doing that, like, oh, she's just really bad with money, or oh, she just can't, like she's just unhealthy or lazy or whatever these things that we judgments we make, or when we see other people or we hear these stories, there's always an emotional component behind it.
For
Always.
sure.
And so
Yeah,
you can't do much work without doing that. You
for
know, so
sure.
that has to, so
Exactly.
the emotional component of your money story,
Hmm.
what did you learn about it? Whose values are you picking up and making your own now? Which
Yes.
maybe they are, and that's fair. But what are
Yep.
your core values? What are your most important things to you in your life? That goes with your money. And
Hmm.
so maybe you really are a very simple person and you just want to live a very basic life. You like service, you want to give a lot away. There's just very thing that maybe that's very important to you. And so you get to do that,
Yeah.
today. But maybe that's not
Yes.
where you came from. You came from like a complete opposite. And so, but getting really good counsel on that kind of stuff, I think is obviously the very most important part of all of this. And then we get
Right.
into like building the spending plan. And then
Yes.
lastly, I just wanted to see about um, a couple things if we can.
For sure. Yeah.
One is you mentioned that you don't use credit cards anymore. I totally get that.
Yep.
Also, but I'm wondering if you really if you believe that that's the right choice for everyone or if it's just one strategy.
Yep.
Because there are benefits, like we use them and we pay them off every month, but we use them
Yep.
for things,
Yep.
for benefits. And then also, how do you help support people so they're doing this, they're already down the track, but you have to live like like you don't have to go on vacation and like buy fancy cars, but you do need to go to the grocery store or have you do need to buy things.
Yep. Yeah.
So like so those two things, like how do you kind of work with people in a very practical way, tips, tools, tricks on those things?
For sure. I think that when it comes to the credit cards, it's just something I do for myself. And so I know what works for me now and what doesn't. So I know that if people can responsibly use credit cards and they're able to plan it and, keep track of it and really understand what's going on, all the power to you because there can be benefits to stuff. Like I have credit cards, I just don't do like my daily spending on it. The way I do it is actually like I have a bank account for like my fixed expenses, and then I have a bank account for my variable expenses. So then that makes it really easy for me when I look at my bank account for my variable expenses. It's like, okay, this is how much I have for my gas, groceries, all my incidental like coffees, things like that. So that's my system that works. I find a system that works for people. My system might not work for everybody. So like I meet you where you are. What's working? Again, that habit stacking. What if that's working for you? Let's keep that as a tool and keep going with it. Yeah. So and yeah, with the buying stuff, like do you mean kind of like if they don't have the money to buy stuff, like that kind of scenario?
No, well, first of all, just to finalize what you're saying, yes, I think everybody
Yeah,
should find what they work because sometimes like cash is great too. Like
totally.
when we were younger, we really had like not much, right? So we worked on a cash system, kind of like
Yes.
an
Love
envelope
cash
system.
systems.
We had allowance, like every
Yeah.
week we both got a certain amount, and that was for like I want to go to lunch with my friend, or I'm going to go to Starbucks or whatever.
Yeah.
And I think that's great because it does kind of help me like, ooh, I can't go to lunch 4 times, but I have to manage it, right? A little bit.
Yes, most definitely.
It's kind of like it's not play money, it's obviously real money, but like it is a good system for a lot of people. And sometimes an envelope system with cash might actually be like, this is your money for groceries this month. That's it.
Agreed.
Or
Yep.
entertainment. That's all you have. And we would say, like, when this is out, we're done. Like that's all we
Yep.
have. So that I think that's great, finding a system that works. And what I meant is like management of, so for example, even though I don't necessarily know if I have like I would qualify myself as like a spending addict or anything, but we are extremely spend conscious, or we're always, and so we're very aware.
Yep.
So I don't go in stores, really.
Right. Right.
I don't have any business being in Target.
Yeah.
Anything I need in Target,
That
I can
darn
buy.
Target.
If anything I need in Target, I can buy on Amazon,
Yeah.
where I can see I need batteries. Here's my batteries. I don't
hmm
need batteries plus 2 candles and 6 placemats. And oh, I need some face cream. And oh,
Totally.
now let's look at the bathing suits. Like for me, like that's a strategy. And then
For
one of the things
sure.
I've talked to my kids about, like you don't need to be in those stores. Like my
Yeah.
daughter called me, like I need to go to TJ Maxx. I'm like, no, you don't.
Yeah.
Like you need to be in
Yeah.
TJ Maxx. Like what are you? I mean, if you're saying I have an event this weekend and I need to have a suit or a new dress, and I'm looking
Mhm.
for the specific dress with these shoes to go to this event, and I need to go to TJ Maxx or Ross or wherever you're going to look for Macy's, great. You have a plan. Like, I'm going to buy this thing. And like, if
Right.
you be able to stick to that thing, I feel like that can work. But don't you feel like, I just feel like we do have to buy things. We
Yeah.
consume a
Yeah.
lot of
Totally.
stuff, food and product.
Yeah.
But like I was just thinking, like, how do you help your people do that without getting involved or
Yeah.
exchanged?
And I think too, like for myself, what I had to do is I had to definitely put boundaries. I think money boundaries are really important. So things like going into Target, like Target is a store, and TJ Maxx, Home Goods, like over in the States that people talk to me about constantly. It's just like I go into Target for one thing and I'm getting all these things. So like sometimes we do have to kind of like cut ourselves off of those things and be like, I can't go into Target. Like it's just not safe for me in there right now. And there was a time for myself I wouldn't go into like a home goods type store. Here in Canada, it's called Home Sense. And I had to say, like, I can't go into Winners and Home Sense. Like, that's my drug of choice. Like, I go in there and it's so beautiful and all the colors, and you just
Yeah.
like are so you just want to like be this person that has a home that looks exactly like everything that's in this store. So yeah, sometimes we have to like really, again, it's that choice, that planning.
Mhm.
And then so I think like like not meal delivery, but like grocery delivery is one of those things that I definitely recommend, or grocery pickup. So then you don't have that
Yes.
fee attached to that because then you're actually not going in there and getting all the things, right? You're actually going in there and like going online, being super intentional. I'm big on meal planning. And I call it like menu because meal planning can feel triggering for people with disordered eating. But like, plan your menu for the week. What are you going to make? Shop from your cupboards first. Like, what can you use in your cupboards? And then make a list and then do like a grocery pickup and go and do it that way. And yeah, like kind of like taking that pressure off of going into that store. And grocery stores can be triggering too. Like I love like all the if there's new stuff, I'm like big on like good healthy eating. And if there's new things, I'm like a kid in a candy store in there sometimes. So it's just like, yeah,
Mhm.
I think meal deliver or food delivery is really powerful for stuff like that.
Yeah, I do pick up and it's the best for
Yeah,
multiple reasons. That's
exactly.
one of them, but for me, it's a lot of it's just convenience too. But I agree because you are in there and it's you can't help it. You're like, wow, look at these strawberries, they look so beautiful. And you're like,
Totally.
we're not even gonna use these this week. And then especially with produce and things like it's waste, that it's actually our produce is very expensive. And so if
Exactly.
you waste that, that's just money you just throw it away.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
right, like being extremely intentional about meal
Mhm.
planning or whatever language you like to use around that and
Yeah,
preparation around like when am I going to be I did this when my kids were little just because for my own sanity. um
totally.
because they were all athletes and we were out all the time. My husband was out a lot and I would be like, okay, what nights is everybody home for dinner? Like what night are we doing leftovers? And
Exactly.
then what night is a crock pot? And I had it printed on like a calendar from
Yeah.
Word document or whatever because
Yeah.
that's what helped me like make sure I was like managing all of the things appropriately and try to reduce our waste because we
Exactly.
do see the stuff in the store and we do want to try it and it does look good and it probably is good, but like if you're not going to be home to consume the products,
Yeah,
like you're just throwing that lot of dollars down the road. So
most
um
definitely.
yeah, I love that. And yeah, I just think a lot of it has to become very intentional and just a lot of awareness. Those stores for me, like, and again, I'm not even a person that like does feel like I have like a super big spending like addiction necessarily, but you don't have to. Like they're on purpose, designed
Yep.
that. They're
Yes,
designed
exactly.
to pull you. Like my mom says all the time, like I would say like several times a week. She's like, I'm going to Home Goods. I'm like, Mom, you don't need like why do you
Yeah.
go to Home Goods? Like you don't need to go to Home Goods. There's nothing,
Yeah.
you don't need anything there. You're 70 years old, like your house is beautiful, you're fine. Like
Yeah.
anyway,
It's
and it's like a lie to ourselves that we're like we're just gonna walk around and just like entice ourselves with these things. And
for
so
sure.
I guess in that same vein, I'm curious, like we have to find other things to fulfill that, right? So like there's a lot of things we can do with that time.
For sure.
You
Yeah.
could be outside, you could do crafts at home, you could be reading, you could be, playing with your dogs or talking to your friends or whatever. But I think sometimes it's the real practical choices to find replacements for these activities. It's like
Yeah.
smokers, like who are in the car, like you have to find another activity that's
Hmm.
going to replace that one so that you can maintain sobriety.
So true.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a big point for sure. Yeah, because a lot of times we're shopping at a boredom. We're picking up our phone and
Yes.
we're going on social media. There's ads, like people picking up their phones is like a trigger these days. And really being intentional with our phones, taking apps off, deleting credit cards from our apps, like all of that stuff because we get one ad on Instagram or TikTok or anything and we're down a hole that we're not climbing out of very quickly. Yeah.
Linda, this has been so fabulous. I know we could probably talk a whole other hour because this topic is so big and so important. So I really appreciate your work and your time here. I know my audience is going to love it. How do they get a hold of you if they want to?
Yeah, absolutely. My website is lindaparmar.com. I have an Instagram, Linda Parmar Money Coach. And also my podcast is called Financial Sobriety School.
Wonderful. I'll make sure I link to all those in the show notes below. And again,
Perfect.
thank you so much for your time. It's just